Welcome everyone to State and Payment, the webinar and live stream that we're going to be doing today. We are so grateful for everybody to come in. We've been really excited to kick off this series of live streams and webinars that we're going to be doing at a cadence of about one every other week. We know it's a really strange time for folks, so we're hoping that these webinars can provide community, education, and maybe a short bit of normalcy for a lot of folks who are working from home now or are more online than they normally are. To that end, we've reached out to a broad audience of developers. If you don't know anything about blockchain, that's perfect. That's amazing. We're going to be providing a lot of resources to get started with blockchain development. Maybe you've been familiar with the ecosystem and you want to get started with technical development. We can get you on that path as well. Ultimately, the main takeaway from this webinar is less about blockchain and more about the challenges of front-end development when you're dealing with asynchronous data and the unusual technical challenges that presents. And Ian and Sean are going to be given a lot of really great perspective on the product side about how users interact, the way that you can adjust, and just some really great front-end tips and tricks to up your React game and just the front-end game generally. My name is Coogan. I work in developer relations at Consensus, which is a blockchain software company. We do a lot of education. We run a boot camp as well as put out a number of webinars and free online courses for people. Our main goal is to just educate the Web 2 and general web development audience about blockchain. And I'm joined here today by two great developers. We have Sean Brennan from Infura and Ian Lapham from Uniswap. And they're going to be our main speakers today. I'm just going to be masters of ceremonies, providing color commentary and moving things along. But I think we're going to start if Sean and Ian, if y'all could just take a few minutes and just introduce yourselves, where you're from, and your experiences and what your company does.
Yeah, I'll start off. Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Right now we have 68 people on the Zoom call, and we're also streaming on Periscope and Twitch. My name is Sean Brennan. I'm the developer relations lead for Infura. Previously I was at MakerDAO building the DAI stablecoin. And right now, what I want to talk about is, as Coogan mentioned, basically some things to know. We'll do a survey of different parts of front-end development. You'll learn some great libraries and tools you can use. And I'll talk about how Infura is part of most of those tools, and you can basically get started really easily with blockchain by signing up for an Infura account, and it basically is your connection to Ethereum. So look forward to talking to everyone over the next hour.
Great. Hey guys, my name is Ian. So I'm a full stack engineer. I work for a company called Uniswap. Uniswap is an exchange on Ethereum, which is one of the biggest, most popular blockchains. So what we do is we allow you to swap tokens, and we do that with an automated market maker. But it's really just focused on token swaps. A lot of the work that I do is on our front end application, which is a React app that you can go to. It's uniswap.exchange. And so today I thought it would be good to give you guys an example of a real code base out in the wild, show you some patterns that we use, some libraries that we think are really good. We use Infura too. And kind of show you that in practice, this stuff is just like building other apps, and hopefully give you some tricks that might help you get started or get better if you're already doing this kind of stuff.
Amazing. And thanks for those intros. And before Sean gets started, I just want to do a quick note, which is that we've gotten a bunch of really great questions from folks over the past couple of days that Ian and Sean are going to be addressing throughout. We're also going to have time at the end for question and answer. So continue to submit questions, and we will do our best. This is a live situation, so we really love getting engagement with things that Ian and Sean are saying. So with that, take it away, Sean. I will step back and let you all do your thing.
Sweet. Before I get into the first part, just the timing of today, we'll talk for about 20 minutes on more of a survey, an overview of the different pieces of a front end, and then we'll get deep into the Uniswap code with Ian. And then we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. So I'm going to switch over the view to a presentation I made. Spoilers. All right. And we have, well, we lose the Zoom view, but Coogan and Ian, feel free to chime in with any questions or comments. We're going to talk about JavaScript development with Infura and then go into the Uniswap code. So here is what I imagine are 6 pieces of a front-end library, like a Web3 front-end that connects to a dApp. And what we'll go over each part and talk about how they contribute to the whole. And then you'll see how the Uniswap front end implements each of these and works with them. So there's the Web3 library, there's your JavaScript code, React, there's the user wallets, how you connect to the user's funds and how you let them interact with your site. There's the Web3 connection, which is the main part Infura comes in, which is your connection to the Ethereum blockchain. There's a couple ways to do that. We'll talk about that. The 2 at the bottom are less important, but they deserve mentioning. There's your testnet environments, which allow you to basically test for free because we're talking about Ethereum here, which has real value, and you don't want to, it can be expensive if you mess that up. And lastly, we'll talk about how certain relatively new libraries allow you to do real-time state updates with things like Embark Subspace and Truffle's Drizzle program.
Sean, I don't think people are seeing the slides on Zoom. I don't know if it would be possible to put that up on Zoom.
Oh, right. Okay. Let's see here.
Yes, it's like Sean's got a great mug, but we also have a great slide demo here. Yeah, great.
There we go.
There we go. My bad. I thought I was presenting.
All good. You're doing great.
Here's what we're talking about. Here's the great title screen. We'll talk about each of these 6 parts. So the first one, the Web3 library. This is really important to know. Basically, whatever your favorite programming language is, it has a Web3 library written for it. For JavaScript, there's 2 main ones, Ethers.js and Web3.js. But you can see each one here, and there's many more. If your favorite language doesn't have a Web3 program yet, then a Web3 library, then an awesome thing to do is write your own. That's what people did here. And basically what Web3 does is they have extremely useful helper methods for interacting with Ethereum. In the early days, you'd have to write your own basically raw transaction data that gets run on the EVM. It gets converted to EVM bytecode and is run on the EVM. But now there's some really nice JavaScript or in other languages, basically helper methods. So these are screenshots of the Ethers.js documentation. And you can see that there's basically all sorts of methods that help with dealing with providers, which is basically your Web3 connector, and contracts. And really, if you want to start with front-end development, you use the Web3 library. That's pretty much the first step. And on the right side, you see the providers part, which is extremely important. It's basically where you slot in your connection to Ethereum. So you can see there's Etherscan provider, there's the Infura provider, Web3 provider, and Fallback provider, among others. And I can talk in detail about those, but basically you set up your connection to Ethereum and use that provider as the go-between between you and the Ethereum network.
Sean, do you think actually, just for people who might not be as familiar with Ethereum or blockchain, just talking about that distinction between the actual front end and then the stuff from Ethereum that's getting piped in, just on a really basic level?
Yeah, that's one thing. So we're talking about the front end in this presentation. There's another part of it, which is you can write your own Ethereum smart contracts, which is code that lives on the blockchain, and you can make a front end for that, or you can make a front end for smart contracts that someone's already put out there. For example, you can make a front end for Uniswap, which we'll talk about. You can make a front end for MakerDAO's DAI code and work on that. So in this presentation, we're not going to be talking about how to deploy a smart contract on Ethereum or how to write the Solidity code that does that. We're going to be talking about connecting to an existing contract that is already out there. The steps to do that, the steps to deploy your own contract involve things like you could use Truffle. There's other tools to do that. If you guys are really curious about that, ask questions in the chat and we can spend some time talking about that. Coogan, was there anything
That's perfect. No, I think that's great. Just making that really brief distinction between there's kind of the whole blockchain world on one side of the divide, and then there's the front end world that we're talking about here. And it seems to me, if this is accurate, that Infura kind of provides a really clean API to this world that it might be intimidating, or if people are maybe just want to experiment, but feel like they have to spin up a lot of infrastructure, Infura can provide a clean API. I think that's just sort of a good, just sort of a foundational point. Yeah, but go ahead. You're doing a great job.
And one more thing. So on the left side of the screen, I don't know if you can see, but this is a way to connect to an existing contract where you put in it's called the ABI, which is a smart contract's basically the set of methods and inputs it has. And basically these are all designed so that you have an easier time connecting to existing contracts. Without this Web3 library, your life is much harder. And again, that's why I recommend starting with these. This is Ethers.js, the documentation here. And there's Web3.js, which you'll also see. Definitely recommend starting there. Here's an example of the Web3.js code where briefly, it basically creates a provider at the top. It defines a token contract by putting in its ABI, as I mentioned, and that creates this token contract object. It's creating a filter of events from that contract that it cares about, being 2 wallet addresses and an amount, and it's watching the latest block, and then it subscribes to events from it, and you can output that in your front end when events of that nature happen. So this is just a quick code example of what some front end code that watches the Ethereum blockchain would look like.
And again, I'm jumping in with a dumb question here, Sean, but like, what would be something you'd want to watch from a smart contract? Like, I know that you say the wallet to and from. What do those represent, and why would someone want to watch for those?
Yeah. So, as an intro to Uniswap, Ian could probably chime in with more detail. But basically, when a user interacts with the Uniswap exchange website, the Uniswap knows their wallet, so they know the wallet from. They know from the provider where that wallet is wanting to send that amount of money, ERC20 or ETH to. And so by watching it like this, they basically have a direct route, or like a direct view of what's going on with Ethereum, and they can update their front end in the quickest possible time to the current state of that transaction that the user cares about. So
I'll chime in here real quick. One specific example is you can kind of think of Uniswap as just like an API into NASDAQ as like a like a parallel to something in the real world. And if you're trying to make a trade on a stock, the price is changing all the time. In our world, instead of pinging some, you know, Bloomberg terminal API, we're going to ping the blockchain to get the price on the current swap. So you need that to be up to date as much as you can, or else your transactions will fail. So things like that are really important. Another one is balances. So I'll show you later on our exchange. We show your balances for all the tokens you have, how many of them you have, and we want that to be up to date too. So we can watch Ethereum, and as your balances change, we can give you that in real time.
Perfect. Thanks, y'all.
Cool. Thanks, Ian. Cool. Moving ahead. Going to pick up the pace a little bit. I'm running over a bit. So the React and JS code, you can start. We have a guide for using Web3.js on our blog. By the way, this presentation will be shared publicly. So all these links will be clickable right after. We'll share it in the chat right after I end. But basically, you can start with React boilerplate and start going with a basic dApp really, really quickly. It's a very small amount of lines of code to start testing out and using it. I'll move this really quick. So React libraries can also help. React is like a main focus of with this talk because it has probably the best libraries and niceties and things that help you out create something faster compared to other JavaScript frameworks. So there's the Uniswap devs wrote a Web3-React library, which has these connectors, which basically connect to the user's wallets and really makes your life easier. And you'll see examples of that soon. User wallets in detail. Here's some real examples of different UIs and how they ask the user to connect to their website. Basically, there's Compound Finance, Uniswap in the center, MakerDAO's Oasis on the right, and KyberSwap on the bottom. These are real examples of basically asking the user to select which wallet they have and which wallet they want to connect with. And then once that connection is established, all the transactions are routed through that wallet. So basically, the user's wallet and the website have a very close connection where data flows from the website through the user's wallet and to the Ethereum blockchain. And in parallel, the website can be watching the blockchain itself with its own Web3 connection. Can talk about that in more detail if that's wasn't clear, but basically going back, these on the right side of the screen, you see these providers. So like Wallet Connect is a wallet provider, there's Ledger, there's actually a lot more there for you. But basically those allow you to connect to these wallets really seamlessly and without reinventing the wheel. The Web3 connection itself, basically these you have two options. You can either sync, manage, and update your own Ethereum clients, or you can use something like Infura for free API calls, which the first option, running your own local nodes or running your own nodes in the cloud, require you to install one of the clients. You have to sync it, which depending on the option takes hours, days, or weeks, and takes a huge amount of space. And when you're running a production site, you have to make sure that that never goes offline and you update it as clients or hard forks happen. So people do this, and what you get when you use Infura is that we already became experts at all that. And so we run the nodes in the cloud, and you just have an API connection to us with one line of code. And all you have to do is sign up, you get a free API key. And when you put in the Web3 provider, you put in your project ID API key. And from there, you just have a connection to Ethereum. You don't have to worry about all that running your own node and having it go down or spending time on DevOps and site reliability, and really recommend starting with that. There's ways to set up what's called like fallback providers. So like if Infura doesn't respond in a quick enough time frame, you can go to the next Web3 provider or your own cloud nodes as a fallback. And I think Ian will mention how Uniswap does that with cascading providers. Just really quickly, don't forget mentioning the testnet environments, which we're talking about mainnet here, like Uniswap's on mainnet. But when you're making a front-end site, you really want to test on something other than mainnet. So there's Ropsten, Coogan, Rinkeby, and Goerli that all have you can basically get free Ether, you get free ERC20 tokens, and they duplicate the functionality of the mainnet. And so Infura has connections to these test networks as well. And the last thing I want to mention is for the block times of Ethereum are around 15 seconds, 13 seconds. And so users aren't used to waiting on front-end changes for that long. And so these Embark Subspace and Truffle Drizzle are two libraries that allow you to basically watch and sync the chain and update your front end in real time based on chain events. Embark Subspace uses what's called like RxJS. Truffle Drizzle uses a Regex store. And basically these libraries also use an Infura connection under the hood to subscribe for certain events that you care about. And really just the bottom left example here of basically tracking Ethereum balances is probably the simplest way to do that I know of. You really just subscribe to an address that you care about, and you get all the info and updates of that address. And there's guides in the link here, if those are curious. And maybe Ian, you can say how Uniswap, it's almost like you want to do, once a user gives you a transaction, once a user submits a transaction on your site, it can basically go into a couple different states, a success or a failure. And so probabilistically, it's going to be a success. It usually works. And so most front ends have like a optimistic UI updates where when a user submits something, it feels really snappy and quick. It says, oh, it's loading, or it's pending, but it's I'm not sure if Uniswap Exchange does that yet, where basically it's probably working, but
that Uniswap does that. I can show you guys in a second. But yeah, that's a big pattern in general when you're creating front ends that are connected to any blockchain. It's this idea of let the user type in things to format a transaction. They click a button, it submits a transaction, and then you give them a loading state. That's like, okay, this thing is submitting. You can watch the blockchain. If it comes back as a success, give them a check mark. If it fails for any reason, give them the X and tell them why. And that's like the gist of a lot of these front ends. And that's a pattern that we use everywhere. And I can show you guys an example of that. And I can show you how we specifically watch for that success or failure. It's the same way you would wait for a 200 response on a regular, API.
Yeah, and so these real-time libraries help with that waiting period where you're watching the blockchain and have to react to something. And cool. So that was an overview of the different pieces of a front end. Again, you have the Web3 libraries, which are in every language. You have the React.js code, which has certain nice functions for working in as we said, like waiting for transactions to happen. You have the user wallets. You have the Web3 connectors, like the Infura connection, testnet environments, and real-time state updates. We're going to do a quick, Tom or Coogan, were there any pressing questions in the chat?
Yeah, there was a great question about GraphQL that I don't know, maybe we can do it, maybe we'll do it after the fact, but did you want to talk at all about GraphQL? Or there's another great question about kind of integrating other languages into a Web3 library. So maybe either one of those, or yeah.
Yeah, briefly, I think GraphQL would fit into the basically querying the Ethereum chain for state. Querying the state of the Ethereum chain in the GraphQL format. There's a couple different options for that. Infura has a blog post on using something called ETHQL for that purpose. There's also a protocol called the Graph, which does something similar.
Yeah.
I don't know, Ian, do you guys use GraphQL at all?
Yeah, the only place we use it, you might want to check this out because it's really cool. We use the Graph protocol, and the Graph protocol basically is a way where you can define these schemas to constantly watch Ethereum and then store data in more complex ways, and then expose that data through a GraphQL endpoint. So we use that on our site for analytics. So I'll put this in the chat. It's uniswap.info, and that's all the stats about Uniswap, and all the data on that site is coming from our subgraph, which is a GraphQL endpoint that stores the state of Uniswap. So check that out. That's a totally other thing that you can get into, and you don't even need to actually connect to the blockchain to start playing around with that information.
That's super cool. Yeah, the Graph's a great resource for the space, and really cool to be able to blend those two technologies together. That question was from Gareth, which really appreciate. Sean, is Ian up next?
Yes.
Alrighty.